Rune Guidance of the Norse here. Let's talk about the Ash Lad. So this video is actually going to be about Loki. Now, I am going to be getting into the Valkyrie, but I think that's going to have to be a part series because it's just very fascinating. But Loki's been coming up a lot for a lot of you lately, and that means we need to talk about it. Now, apart from what we see on social media platforms, TikTok in particular, and their presentations of Loki and who he is, this video is going to be a little bit different than that, and maybe that will be to some of your disappointment. But the thing about Loki is he very much is a folk type of spirit, even if he wasn't worshipped as a deity so much in most of Scandinavia. We do find evidence, though, that his name and what his purpose was in history and in factual types of situations. And one of those being a fire spirit. Now, I know this is weird because according to social media platforms, we associate Loki, even if we don't associate him with all those Marvel movies and stuff, which I've never even seen them. We tend to see, oh, he's associated with flame, he's associated with fire. Well, where do we get that? Where is that evident? Now, we do know that there is, in the sagas and Eddas, there is a story where Thor and Loki go and do some tests, some games with certain Jotuns, and there is a Jotun named Logi, L-O-G-I, who Loki fights with. Logi is flame and actually wins. So they go into this fight or this game with Loki saying, my idea of weaponry is hunger because I can devour everything. I'm hungry. But Loki was actually flame, and so the flame actually beat the hunger, which absolutely makes sense. Look at all the fires that have been taking place in California and the devastation. Once a fire is uncontained, it is ravenous, a ravenous beast or entity that consumes every single thing in its path. So in the Gulfaginning, in the tale of Utgard Loki, which is this giant Logi, it talks about how he is, this Logi character is the son of a big Jotun and has two brothers. And my pronunciation is probably horrible, but Leir is actually Aegir, and so that brother rules the sea. Kari, which that's kind of funny because that's my name, and that's what my nickname was growing up by my family, Kari. My dad always called me Kari, is the ruler of the wind. Woo! No surprise there. And then we have, of course, this Logi, which is said to rule over fire. So in the Gylfaginning, it is these people that, these Jotuns that are in charge of these elements. Now, in the Flateyjar book, it's an Icelandic thing. That is a script. That is where it really talks about these three brothers and how they are the sons of this Jotun. So, over time, many people have associated this Logi with Loki, and there's lots of videos on this, I'm sure, on the internet where they kind of feel that the etymology of the G Loki and the name Loki are not actually connected through etymology. In other words, they are different beings. They are one is not in reference to another. But does that mean Loki is not associated with fire? Now, some scholars will say that. They'll be like, oh, well, see, the words don't line up. That's this Jotun is something different. And there's absolutely no basis for Loki being associated with fire. But I want to bring to you the tales of the Ash Lad. The tales of the Ash Lad are a folk fairy tales that were predominantly in Norway, and they are about this kind of underdog character. He's called the Ash Lad because he sits around the fire and dwells in the ash moor, which could almost be a negative connotation, implying that he sits around the fire. He's lazy. He's not out doing stuff. He's always looking for an easier way out. It can imply that. I'm sorry, I have the hiccups so bad. I try to hold my breath. Anyway, most people would then remake a whole video. Not me. No. Anyway, this Ash Lad is said to get into situations where he uses his cleverness to get out of them. He uses, despite his underdog status and where he sits in the community, or his even using his compassion sometimes to work out of a situation. So he's sort of like a hero of the underdog. That's what these folk tales in general would leave the listener feeling when they heard them. That, hey, the underdog can make it, the underdog can win. You don't have to have high status in a community and wealth and beauty and all these things. You can use your wits and still make a way for yourself, which is really a big Scandinavian foundational belief. However, we also see that there are references to the name Loki regarding fire spirits or fireplace or hearth energy in other parts of Scandinavian areas as well. And that's really interesting. For instance, in the Dalarna province of Sweden, where my runes are that Dalecarlian script that I always talk about, and where an area of Värmland, Dalarna, areas where my family's from, there is this idea of Loki visslar, and that is the crackling of a hearth fire, and it's referred to as Loki whistling. Okay, that's very interesting. We also see that in some parts of Finland and in certain parts of Norway, that Loki also is associated with a hearth spirit or a fire spirit. That energy is called Loki, and that's directly referring to that. So we see these different patches that are kind of unrelated to each other geographically. Gives us the implication that this was maybe a widespread folk belief. And just because we don't necessarily see it in sagas and eddas doesn't mean that it did not exist. Again, my analogy of, scratching the wall and you see a cockroach, there's hundreds and thousands of them in the wall that you never see. It's the same thing with archaeology and even written texts, that you're only getting a part of the story. And yes, you have to use those things as part of the story and the narrative for the most part. But then we see things like this where it's like, wow, maybe there is that energy out there regarding Loki. So with that assumption in mind, if we're associating it with fire, the rune we would use, of course, would be Kenaz to invoke that type of energy. But let's think about that. Of course, this is a modern reflection that's looking backwards for us to say that, because we don't have indication that Kenaz is associated with Loki, but we're connecting those dots by saying, well, we're associating it with Loki because of the flame and the fire aspect. That being said, think about the unpredictability of fire, and that is definitely what Loki is in the sagas and Eddas, right? In our written texts, which came later in the medieval period. If we take oral interpretations and written texts, we can see that Loki is a trickster. He is mischief making. We see this in all cultures where there is a trickster spirit. And again, you know my belief that the deities and the runes, this is all reflections of natural formations of energy, which can have a type of consciousness, that there is this thing about the unpredictability in nature and how it is needed and how it is part of the growth and the expansion of life. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Now, we see in the written texts regarding Loki, sorry about that he causes problems. He causes situations that gets the other gods all messed up. But a lot of the times, he then is the one who solves the problems. He solves the situations. And that's very interesting. Let's take fire. Let's take what it does, why we even have controlled burns in forests and things like that. It's all consuming. It's destructive. It's horrible. It kills. But then it gives life, the mineral breakdown into the soil, that there are forests and certain plants that cannot live at all unless these fires take place. So it's this juxtaposition, this chaotic energy, this turning everything upside down to cause a positive outcome in the long run. It's very much like Hagalaz, which is, more focused on ice, that chaotic energy of ice, the hailstorm. Hagalaz beats down and does all kinds of destruction, but then that ice melts and nourishes the ground. Its mirrored rune, in my opinion, could possibly be Kenaz, which is that destructive, powerful, incredible force of fire that destroys and consumes everything in sight, eviscerates it, evaporates it, dissolves it, but then also nourishes the remains for growth to come back even more. That is a way that we would want to work with a Lokian spirit. People use it as a cop-out that, oh, it's chaos, it's whatever. That's why I serve Loki as a deity because, that's my type of energy. Well, that's great. Then while after the shambles are done, there should be great fruit in your life as well. And if there's not, then maybe you're not really understanding the power and the presence of what Loki is about. And there is some reference, and I'm not going to get into all the things about Loki and his mouth being sewn shut and all the different places that we see talk about him. That's not what this video is about, like going step by step talking about Loki. I want you to think beyond all that. Those are things you can Google, right? I want you to think about Loki as being this energy that can truly help transform you and take you to the next level. One thing you must understand about this consciousness or this energy is it cannot be controlled, and therefore that can be a scary thing. But look at it like fire. You can't control fire. Those flames are going to go wherever they want to go. They're going to lap up whatever they want, but you can contain fire. So you can create a boundary within which you want that Lokian spirit to be able to work. Maybe devour and dissipate things in your life and then set the groundwork for fertility, something like Ingwa's coming in and creating growth that's going to be more nutritious and even more abundant because that fire took place. If you think you can control Lokian energy, that spirit, that consciousness, or fire itself, you cannot control it. I know it's called a control burn, but that's because it's a contained burn. And they are ready there to douse that fire should it somehow get beyond its containment. So this is wisdom when working with this type of energy. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because of all the examples we see of it in the physical realm lately, but and things that others of you have been bringing to my attention in your own lives. But because I know many of you, that is kind of the gateway of how you entered into Norse heathenry, that attraction to that type of spirit or a connection to that type of spirit. And it's important for you to understand the energy behind it and how to truly work with it in a beneficial way and not in an all-consuming way. I have seen people deconstruct themselves and their lives in a negative way by chasing after this spirit, by being God-spoused to it and allowing it to consume them in a negative way, where they don't put boundaries in place, they don't put containment in place, because they're looking at it through a romantic lens instead of a practical elemental lens, which you must do. It is easy to go off on the romanticism of deities and ideologies. It is important to stay grounded and understand their roles and their place and your place in their world and theirs in yours. So that's the main thing I wanted to say about Lokian energy. It will burn you if you do not set containment for it in your life. And if you don't know how to do that, then maybe you shouldn't work with that energy. Oh, so many people are going to be mad at me. Anyway, there's another aspect that I wanted to mention, and that is kind of this reflection of Odin and Loki. Okay, so we've got them being blood brothers and them having some connection, and I do think it's very interesting that Odin is more of a thought out, conniving is a negative word, but you could say plotting or coming up with a game plan ahead of time, being organized the thoughts on how you want to get ahead, so that it's a different type of wisdom. It is, Odin wisdom is so much more about a thoughtful way to move forward with wisdom and implement it, where Lokian is that free, crazy, chaotic energy, but still is wisdom because he solves the problems that he creates. So where one is more of a straight line to get to an end, whether it's good or bad, his is up and around and around and about, and somehow it ends up at that place that it's supposed to be. It's the non-conventional wisdom. It is the thinking out of the box type of wisdom. It's the other than wisdom as opposed to Odin. And what I find interesting is Odin represents the breath or the air. And if Loki represents fire, think about that. The breath and the air feeds the flame. So there is this elemental connection between these two that is very interesting. And how might that work if you are using them together or working with them together for an end that is positive for you and those you care about in your life? So I'm trying to bring not necessarily the factual things about Loki, but the spiritual things about Loki in this video. And I hope this helps you maybe approach that energy in a different way. Make sure you let me know. Even post it in the Discord. I think it's really, really interesting. And there's so much more. We could go on for hours and hours. But I hope that this is interesting for you and you can apply it into your life. So stay tuned for what's coming next. Very interesting stuff. And for those of you who have gotten my book, there's lots of exciting things happening with that too. I would love to hear your feedback regarding that. I was so surprised at how thin it was. I was like, oh my God, all that work, all that knowledge, those words into this thin little book. I was like, what? But that's okay, because so many of us have ADD. We can't be sitting through some big novel anyway. I'd love to hear your take on it. So give me feedback, guys. Love you all. I'll be talking to you soon. I've got a lot of upheaval in my life right now, Loki and stuff happening that's going to be good, but is really taking so much time for me right at this moment. So I apologize for that, but I will be talking to you soon, and love you guys. Talk soon. Love you.